Thank you, Olivier. Believe me, it's a very nice thing to see a young undergraduate student to become a very well-recognized scientist as Olivier is now, and it is something we are all looking for, and I'm very grateful to Olivier for everything he has done. So I will talk about a topic that is not so well studied, about the potential differences between hypobaric, that means real altitude, and normobaric hypoxia, and the potential difference and consequences for team sports preparation. You might know this figure. It is a figure that shows the different hypoxic methods. And how you can see, you have the high-high, the high-low, and the high-HE, high-HT. This figure has been drawn for distance or endurance athletes, for sure. And in my view, it's a nice figure, but we are missing few things. The first thing is about RSH, the use of high-intensity exercise in hypoxia, and it has been very well presented yesterday by Raphael Face, who is somewhere in the room, and we showed that RSH can improve repeated sprint ability. And we also speculate that it has very little to do with metabolic factors, that it has a lot to do with the compensatory vasodilation induced by the reduction in the oxygen content. And specifically, this increased in muscle blood flow that could change the behavior of the fast-twitch fibers. That's why, in our view, RSH can only improve repeated sprint ability if you have high altitude and high intensity to have enough fast-twitch fibers recruitment. The other things that are missing, in our view, is the differences between real and simulated altitude. You can see here in the high-low method, it was mentioned the natural terrestrial altitude, that would be hypobaric hypoxia, versus the simulated altitude, that will be the normobaric hypoxia. But we might also investigate what could be the effect of using HH versus NH in IHT or in RSH. And the third point, in our view, that is missing on this figure is the possibility to combine the different methods. For example, if you use live high, train low, and high-intensity training in hypoxia, like RSH, you can get a live high, train low, and high training methods. And in our view, the future and the expertise for the practitioner, for the coaches, for people who prescribe hypoxic training will be to play with all the different possibilities that we get now. So it explains why in Lausanne, the Olympic capital, we have on the altitude training two topics, the one on repeated sprint training in hypoxia, and the other one on comparing hypobaric, normobaric hypoxia. For this presentation, I will use a paper that has been published recently by Raphael Face in Medicine Science, and where we used 24-hour hypoxic exposure. First, in hypobaric hypoxia, it's a ski resort. It's a place above the very cozy, trendy ski resort of Verbier. Verbier is also known for the amazing climb of Contador. Huh? Remember, people who are involved in cycling. And he was too fast. OK, we miss it. And we compared also the same altitude in an hypoxic chamber that we have in Switzerland. Obviously, we try to match the oxygen pressure. And you can see here, from sea level to the hypoxic condition, the 24 hours, the oxygen pressure, the ambient inspired pressure was similar. But you know also that in terms of the fraction of oxygen, if you are in an hypoxic chamber, you will reduce your fraction on oxygen, not if you are in the real mountain. And the opposite, when you take the lift to go to the top of the ski resort, you reduce your barometric pressure, and does not happen in the room. So we have the same oxygen pressure, but we don't have the same barometric pressure. That means we don't have the same pressure also in nitrogen in the alveolar. For long, it was thought that only the oxygen pressure was critical, and it has been called the equivalent air altitude model. So during these 24 hours, we had several measurements, but one of them was every 8 hours, some submaximal exercise at 50% of the normoxic PPO, 6 minutes. And we did measure also heart rate, gas exchange, exhaled NO. We measured also blood nitrate and nitrate. And we had an investigation on the oxidative stress and the antioxidants. So any combination that would induce pressure lower, oxygen pressure lower than 150 millimeters of mercury can be, by definition, named as hypoxic. And then you have the different combination. Here, for example, we just show that for this pressure, you can get different possibilities. And it's easy to compare conditions that are perfectly matched in terms of the PO2, but so far, it is completely unknown if it is clinically relevant to differentiate HH and NH in terms of the acute responses, and even more unknown in terms of the long-term adaptation. So far, we found 7 topics where it has been already shown in the literature that HH and NH are different. Ventilatory response, the fluids, pre-acclimatization and the severity and prevalence of the acute mountain sickness, performance-related data, NO metabolism, oxidative stress, and the postural control, the balance. First of all, quite a long time ago, it has been already described that the ventilation is lower in hypobaric hypoxia compared to the normobaric hypoxia. It seems that the alveolar pressure is slightly higher in NH than in HH, especially at high ventilation rates. And there's a specific adaptation in HH where you get a lower tidal volume and a higher respiratory frequency. How does it relate with the data that Rob just showed recently? We don't know. There's a trend for a lower end tidal pressure in oxygen and end tidal pressure in CO2 value in HH that is directly related to the slightly different ventilatory pattern. And overall, this suggests then that in hypobaric hypoxia, you might get a higher alveolar physiological dead space. Right? One example of the difference in ventilation is from the paper of Savouret. You get a lower ventilation at rest in HH compared to NH. In our study, we found also that at submaximal intensity, we get a difference in the ventilatory responses. And again, it fits very well with the resting value, since from 3 to the 24 hours of exposure, we always found a lower minute ventilation in HH compared to NH. Second point, the fluids. This paper is probably the first paper of Professor Levin on altitude physiology in '88. And he found that the barometric pressure by itself can modify the fluid circulations, and especially has an effect on the pulmonary length. That might affect the membrane flow through the alveoli capillary membrane. It was also suggest that it might induce a larger pulmonary vasoconstriction in HH and affect to a larger extent the oxygen diffusion in HH compared to NH. Concainen vessel, they reported also that the barometric pressure by itself might influence the nitrogen and the oxygen concentration in the cerebrospinal fluid, but the demonstration is not that clear, that it might partly change the central regulation of ventilation. So at this stage, we know there are slightly different ventilatory patterns. We don't know where it comes from. Some hypotheses here. More clinically relevant, and I think stronger in terms of evidence, the differences in terms of pre-acclimatization strategy on the acute mounting sickness severity. This data comes from the team of the US Army. They use, as you know, Pikes Peak at the altitude of 4,300 as their research location. And in different studies, they showed first that pre-acclimatization in HH, in this case, was 3 weeks, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week at Pikes Peak, was very good, very efficient as a pre-acclimatization strategy when they took their subjects for 30 hours in Pikes Peak. They had a very important decrease in the AMS severity, and they had a decrease in the end-tidal pressure of CO2. As you know, that is an indication of the increased ventilation. In conclusion, they summarize that pre-acclimatization, intermittent pre-acclimatization in hypobaric hypoxia is an effective alternative method to chronic altitude residence, since it will increase the ventilation and reduce the incidence and severity of AMS. Okay, fine. Nothing so surprising at that stage. Most interestingly is that when they use pre-acclimatization in NH, in an hypoxic chamber, and obviously it's not exactly the same altitude, we can discuss that. The good stuff in hypoxic chamber is that you can have also a control group, a sham group. And they had 7 nights at this simulated altitude in the hypoxic group and a sham group. And then they observed what was going on when they took these people pre-acclimatized in NH, again, at Pikes Peak, at this altitude. What happened? Very light benefits of the pre-acclimatization. They observed that only during the night, not during the day, the saturation was slightly improved compared to non-pre-acclimatized people, and the AMS only upon awakening was lower in the NH group compared to the sham group. And their conclusion was pre-acclimatization in NH had no impact on AMS or exercise performance for the remainder of the day. So how does it fit with our own interest in terms of the exercise adaptation? Recently, they summarized their finding in this paper that has been published a few months ago. First, they assess the efficiency of the pre-acclimatization strategy based on 2 simple parameters: the decrease in the pit CO2 or the increase on the oxygen saturation. You get the data here, but simply all here, IAE, that's HH, and you have to study in NH with every time a NH treatment and a sham group. And you can see here that all this strategy has been evaluated as either effective or very effective, depending on the magnitude of the decrease in the pit CO2 or the magnitude of the increase of the oxygen, the arterial saturation. At the end of the pre-acclimatization phase, people were supposed to be acclimatized. What happened when they took these people to Pikes Peak, and very shortly after they arrived, they had the performance? You can see here that the improvement in performance, time trial, it was either depending on the study, some treadmill or cycling time trial, but they had, compared to non-acclimatized people, improvement in their time trial performance in hypobaric hypoxia. But you can also notice that people who've been acclimatized in normobaric hypoxia, nada, no improvement in performance. Then recently we did comment, and in our view, we think that the most striking and novel finding from this review is a lack of transfer of the very slight benefits induced by the NH acclimatization to the HH conditions. It seems that it is two different worlds, at least for performance and for AMS. When transported to Pikes Peak, subjects who were pre-acclimatized in NH had minimal benefits. And you can see it was only a very slight decrease in Pikes Peak in the PET CO2 and a slight decrease in the prevalence of AMS. Instead of having 80 to 100% with AMS in non-acclimatized people, they had 50 to 60% of the subjects with EMS. And even more interesting, I think, for the exercise physiologist is the fact that the ventilatory acclimatization that was effective in NH is not effective in HH, and that there is no transfer at all from this minimal but existing benefits in terms of ventilation to the non-benefits in terms of performance. It did not translate to performance benefits. Fourth point, sorry. What's going on in terms of performance? At this stage, there is no direct comparison of decrease in time trial or any type of performance with the same group. People, we know their level of ventilatory acclimatization, their susceptibility to hypoxia. There is no comparison of the decrease in NH versus HH. We are doing this study at the moment. But going back to this very, very nice meta-analysis of Bonetti and Will Hopkins, if you look at the comparison between the live high, train low, natural means hypobaric hypoxia, and artificial means normobaric hypoxia, you can get some artificial using hypobaric chamber, but now, as we all know, most of the hypoxic chamber in the world are with either oxygen extraction or nitrogen addition, means it is normobaric hypoxia. And look at the data. It's in elite, 4% of improvement in mean power output, so it means performance, instead of non-significant change in the normobaric hypoxia. Same difference in non-elite. I have to comment that in addition of that, all the data in Prémanon, for example, the place where Carsten had his study, are not included. They would be here, and they would probably decrease this number with Carsten's study, but also with the study that were run before. In terms of performance, none of these studies were successful. If we look to and it's a good stuff we can get with meta-analysis, we can play with a number. Then if we look at what has been called the supposed to be enhanced protocol, then you move a little bit the altitude or you delay a little bit the performance. Sorry, you can see same type of difference between HH and NH. It's not so clear, but it's still in favor of the HH, live high, train low protocol. Fifth point. We all know that due to Andrew Jones now, beetroot juice and NO are very, very important in all the endurance sports. So the NO metabolisms. And first, we know also from these people that exhaled NO is lower in HH than in NH. That might come, I'm very prudent, from a higher diffusion from the upper tracts to the alveoli than to hemoglobin in HH. That's probably something to do with the difference in nitrogen pressure that cannot be changed between the two conditions. So the level of nitric oxide recaptured by the blood compartment would be higher in HH. It has been speculated this way. And then Ben Kaiser, who's working now in my institute in Lausanne, did speculate also that this mechanism, would it be related to the, to be proven yet, benefits to train in real altitude than in simulated altitude? You got a figure here about the difference in the exhaled NO. And we know also that's quite important in terms of the ventilatory adaptation and potential pathophysiological response to high altitude, because these people, they show that there's a relationship between NO, pulmonary arterial pressure, and pulmonary edema risk. And we know also that the decrease in the exhaled NO that has been shown here in HH comes from the epithelial cells of the respiratory tract. In her study, the study of Raphael, we found the same results. Here you have got the NH data on the exhaled NO, and you have the data on the blood nitrate and nitrite. And you can see clearly there's a large difference between the two conditions. NOx decreased in HH, was stable in HH. In NH, same for exhaled NO. A new findings of our preliminary study that was, as I said, published is the difference in terms of the oxidative stress. You got few markers. AOPP is an indicator of the oxidation of the plasma protein, and SOD. And you can see that in HH, the oxidative stress is higher than in NH. And we found also that the plasma pH was different. We found a stable plasma pH in HH and an increase in NH. So if I summarize, so far we know some slight difference in the ventilatory response. We know some difference in the exhaled nitric oxide. It was shown also by a colleague of us, Vincent Pialot, that some type of altitude, including NH, can increase the oxidative stress, but we didn't find any relationship between these parameters. Pialot reported also that the increased oxidative stress is associated with a decreased NO, that it can blunt NO metabolisms. In the study of Raphael, just to summarize, we get a lower ventilatory response in HH. We get a lower pH. So there's a direct relationship here, not that difficult to understand. Then we get a higher oxidative stress. Some people ahead of us found a relationship between the pH and increased reactive oxygen species. Then we get a lower nitrate, blood nitrate and nitrate, and exhaled NO, again in HH. And Pialot reported that the increased oxidative stress might inhibit NO. And finally, we get this potential relationship between the lower ventilatory response and the lower NOx and exhaled NO. So we got some mechanism that we have to still to work on it, but in our view, that has important implication for athletes. Training and acclimatization. Training, for all the hypoxic methods for training to sea level, because then you have to choose where you're going to train, but also for acclimatization to competition in altitude. Seventh point, postural control. Two things are very well known. Altitude will deteriorate your balance, your postural control. Second things, muscle fatigue, especially in the calf, on the plantar flexors, will also deteriorate your balance, your postural control. So recently we published a paper, it was in high altitude medicine of biology, where we compare HH and NH. By the way, we compare the three conditions, Normobaric Normobaric Hypoxia, and Hypobaric Hypoxia, the two hypoxic conditions at two altitude, 1,700 and 3,000. And you get the results here. HH deteriorates the postural stability. For example, the oscillation in the anterior-posterior plane, the variance of speed of the surface of the center of pressure. compared to NN, where no difference was observed between normobaric hypoxia and normobaric normoxia. And I have to say that it was blinded to the subject. Then hypobaria, instead of hypoxia per se, might explain the important contribution to the altered balance classically reported in altitude. Then we've been one step further, and these data are not ready yet for publication, but we assess if the detrimental effect of muscle fatigue would be different in hypobaric hypoxia, normobaric hypoxia, or normoxia. So we had 8 30 seconds fatiguing exercise of the plantar flexor, and we assess the postural control. It was interspaced, 30 seconds plantar flexors fatigue, 30 seconds on a posterographic plate. You can observe, but that's not new, that the more fatigue you are, the higher the alteration of your balance, assessed here by the surface of the center of pressure trajectory. You can also, if you look at this data, it's exactly the same than here. You can see that even in a non-fatigue condition, in hypobaric hypoxia, you get a higher trajectory of your center of pressure compared to normobaric hypoxia and compared to NN. But you can also clearly show that the magnitude of the change induced by the plantar flexor muscle fatigue is much larger in HH than in NH or NN. It might have some implication for the sports like biathlon, all these sports that could be also practiced at quite high altitude. Biathlon, I think you can go up to 1,700. So definitely, the equivalent air altitude model is a very simple one, but we found many, many differences. So to summarize, we have a lot of evidence that NH and HH are not similar and induce different responses. Especially, we think that the differences that we found in terms of the oxidative nitrosative stress can induce some difference in the cardiovascular, endothelial function, sympathetic activation, and so on, and potentially in the endurance exercise responses. We hypothesize that this difference in oxidative and nitrosative stress play a role, and a major role, for the differences observed between the two hypoxic conditions. At the moment, I spoke briefly about it yesterday. We are conducting a study at 3,500 at the Jungfraujoch. It's a nice place for walking, and in an hypoxic chamber over 26 hours. And we are measuring a lot of additional parameters. We are also interested on the practical things. And then we got the funding, and we're going to do that this summer, to have 2 live high, train low training camp, one in Prémanon, in Normobaric hypoxia, and the other one at the same altitude in a Swiss resort. And in this setup, we will measure applied parameters of performance and hemoglobin mass and so on and so on. But we will also assess, with a practical way, the quality of the sleep. And I can't remember exactly who mentioned that it's probably a very important parameter. So, 5 years ago, in March 2008, just before I was leaving Qatar, I had a lecture exactly in this room, and the topic was altitude training for team sports. And at that time, we had some assumption. And at that time, we thought that already the combination of the different methods would be very critical for exercise prescription and training prescription. So now we think that in addition of that, we need to take into account if it's real or simulated altitude. I don't want to say that real is better than simulated. I think we have many tools. We can use all of them. But so far, the clinical evidence between the differences are still lacking. In the field of medicine, I show you some data on AMS. In the field in sport performance, there's no data. Further research are needed. And based on few subjects, we can already say that time trial is more reduced in HH compared to Normoxia than in NH. That's on our current study. In terms of periodization, in this paper in 2010, in this review, I did suggest different type of periodization based mainly on which parameter might be important on the different type of sports. And here I think that we can go one step further. At least we have to investigate one step further the different HH or NH condition. So leave high, train low and high. Is it sleeping high? Is it exercising high in hypobaric or in normobaric hypoxia? In Switzerland, we have the possibility to do both very, very easily. And I have to acknowledge that the combination of the different hypoxic methods is something that is now more and more done, especially by the people of the AIS. And Philo Sanders presented some data with different type of leave high, train high, or leave at moderate, sleeping in a tent in Fredbo at 3,000, so different type of combination. And recently, I can't remember who was the first author, they did also a comparison with leave high, train low, with some additional AHT, let's say this way. But further research are needed on the practical use of HH versus NH, and again, about the hypoxic dose, and it's related to Rob yesterday's presentation in terms of the post-hypoxia time course of adaptation. Since ventilation is slightly different, are the ventilatory adaptation similar or not? We don't know yet, but we know that coaches are not using exactly the same delay post-exercise if it's in normobaric hypoxia or in hypobaric hypoxia. I'd like to thank the people I'm working with. So Raphael, he was giving his arm to science. Very good. Raphael. Next time it will be the whole body. And also people, they're just wishing me a very pleasant night. Jonas Soji and Thomas Rip. Thank you for your attention.